Yes, ladies and gentlemen, now we are starting for our first presentation, which is what is computer. Let me show you about the contents. We're going to talk about the objective of this that. Then we're going to talk more about what is computer, later input devices, computer cases, computer devices, and computer systems. Let's talk about this introduction. But before that, let me give you some more information about the computers and small definition. A computer is a device that can receive, process, and store data. They are used as tools in every part of society together with the internet. Computers nowadays are complex. There are a lot of different components inside them, and they all serve different purposes. They all need to work together for the computer to work. Knowing how a computer works makes it easier to use a computer by being able to understand how a computer will respond. Of course, in objective, what we're going to talk about that is what is the basic of the computers. Okay, we have to familiarize with the basics of computers, and this should give you a stepping stone to use when learning more specific details about the computer hardware. Also, we're going to talk about this computer hardware, very details about them. Let's talk about that. What is that? As I said a few minutes ago, the computer is a device that takes input such as numbers, text, sound, image, animations, video, etc. and converts it, returning the changed input, which is processed input, as output. All numbers, text, sounds, images, animations, and video used as input are called data, and all numbers, text, sound, images, animations, and video turned as output are called informations. You see on the pictures left side, these are the inputs, and there's a process is going on. At later right side data come out. So especially we're going to talk about data, process, input. Let's give a little more detail about that, which I said from left side of that. The data consists of numbers, text, sound, images, animations, and video, as pictured on the left side of the process. The process converts numbers, text, sounds, images, animations, and video into usable data, which is called information on the right side of the picture. The information consists of numbers, text, sound, images, animations, and video that has been converted by the process. As you see on the picture, on the left side of that, the data is inserted using as input device. The central processing unit converts data to the information part. The information is put on the output device on the right side of the picture. As you see, a storage device is a device for storing data and information. Otherwise, you will lose all this data. A basic computer consists of 4 computers: an input device, a CPU, which is central processing unit, output devices, and memory. Let's go a little bit details about each one. If you want to talk about keyboards, in computing, as input device is very peripheral piece of computer hardware equipment used to provide data and control signals to an information process system such as computer or other information appliance. For example, input devices include keyboards, pointing devices, mouses, high degree of freedom input devices, computer devices, and digital cameras, joysticks, and many input devices can be classified according to modifier of input, which is mechanical, motion, audiovisual. The input is discrete, for example key presses, or continuous like mouse position through digitized into the discrete quantity is fast enough to be considered continuous. The number of degrees of freedom involved that, let's say, two-dimensional traditional mice or three-dimensional navigator designed for CAD, which is computer-aided design applications. Pointing devices, which are input device used to specify a position in space, can further be classified according to whether the input is direct or indirect. With direct input, the input space coincides with the display space. For example, pointing is done in the space where visual feedbacks or the pointer appears. Touch screens and light pens involve direct input. Examples involving indirect input include the mouse and trackballs. Whether the positional information is absolute, like touch screen, or relative, with the mouse that can be lifted and repositioned. Direct input is almost necessarily absolute, but indirect input may be either absolute or relative. For example, digitizing graphing tablets that do not have an embedded screen involve direct input and sense absolute positions and are often run in an absolute input mode, but they may be set up to simulate a relative input mode like that of a touched, where the stylus or puck can be lifted into positions. As you see on the screen, the keyboard, pointing devices, high degree of freedom input devices, composite devices, imagining and video input devices, also audio input devices, and then further we're gonna talk about that. Let's see on the screen some keyboards and mouses and also some kind of input devices you can see in it. Let me give you a little bit more information about the keyboard. Is a human interface which was in previous screen. That's a keyboard which is representing as a layout of buttons. Each button or key can be used or either input a linguistic characters or computers or to call open a particular function of the computer. Traditional keyboards use spring-based buttons. Touch, though never variations employ virtual keys or even projected keyboards. Example of types of keyboards include computer keyboards like keyers and that particular. Let's say in the pointing devices that okay. Keyboard devices are the most commonly used input devices today. Pointing devices is a human interface device that allows user to input the spatial part of the computer. In this case, a mouse or touchpad. This is the usual achieved by detecting movements, physical and mouse touchpads. Analog devices such as 3D mouse, joysticks or pointing sticks function or reporting the angle. Of course, we would like to call a high degree of freedom input devices are which many continuous degrees of freedom as input. Especially they can use as pointing devices but are generally used in ways that don't involve pointing to a location in space, such as control as a camera, angle of while 3D application. These keywords are caves, their input register 3D of required. These are the composite devices. As you see on the screen is a Y remote with attached strap. Input devices such as buttons or joysticks can be combined on a single physical device that could be together through of as composite device. Many gaming devices have controlled like this. Technically, mice are composite devices as they both track movement and provide buttons or clicking. But composite devices are generally considered to have more than two different forms of input. Simply, these are game controller, these are gamepad, which we call joypad, and maybe pendle and we remote control. And let's talk about the imaging and video input devices. You see there are lots of input devices on the screen. Let's we talk about this. Microsoft Kinect sensor screen here on TV works by detecting human motions visually. In the right side of the screen you can see it moves when human moves as well. Or simply we can call this digital camera, digital camcorder, portable media player, webcam, Microsoft Kinect sensor, image scanner, fingerprint scanner, barcode reader, 3D scanner, printer, laser, rangefinder, eye gaze tracker are some of the devices which is imaging and video input. Its medical imaging can be computed tomography, magnetic resonance imaging, positron emission tomography, and medical ultrasonography are some of the other input devices in medical part. Well, let me talk about also the input devices, audio especially. In the fashion of video devices, audio devices are used either capture or create sound. In some cases, any audio output device can be used as an input device in order to capture product sound. Let's say microphone, maybe MIDI keyboard or other digital musical instruments. One of the most common input devices is the keyboard, used to enter text as well. Let's talk about the computer keys, which is simply CPU. It's inside, and CPU and memory are put into the computer keys, and you see on the screen there are some kind of different types computer cases, and you have to understand that this computer cases is almost left side of the inputs. On the main part in the computer case we see the CPU and memory, which is RAM and ROM, but also we can divide this hard disk and other CD parts on the memory as well. At the end right side you can see mainly an export system. Let's talk about in that part different parts. And before that, let me continue with this that. And memory, primary storage or memory means the space on your hard drive that is briefly used for working space. This usually occurs in chip. Memory consists of 4 types of memory chips: RAM, ROM, CMOS, and flash. And what is it? RAM. RAM stands for random access memory and is a type of chip used in primary storage memory. It is also temporary storage holding software instructions and short-term working memory for the processor. RAM can be increased in most computers by using the expandable memory slots and that part. What is primary storage? Let's say primary storage is called primary because it is main memory that is accessible to the sphere. It is used to store data that is currently being in primary storage. And what we call about the random access memory or its RAM, form of data storage used in computers, taken in the form of integrated circuits, which represents primary of temporary storage, and it allows data which is stored to be accessed in any order, which is why it's called random. Making it random instead of sequential greatly increases the speed of computer can operate since time is not wasted going to place where needed data storage or maybe in tape backups. What is volatile? It's a descriptive word for RAM, which is short-term memory. When the computer loses power, the temporary storage will be lost. In order to prevent data from being lost, it must be saved to a hard disk or permanent storage are called ROM, which is read-only memory. Let's see in this picture what is primary storage, secondary storage, and how we're going to talk about the RAM and ROM in the cache memories. RAM work faster than hard drive and some faster than flash memories, which isn't volatile. This greater speed is why it's still used in computers today. Computer will run faster and more efficient with more RAM. The suggested amount of RAM for current operating systems such as Windows XP or Operating System X 10.5 runs smoothly with the weight of shared graphics memory and programs in 1024 megabytes, which is 1 gigabyte. Currently, RAM comes in three types: DDR1, DDR2, DDR3. DDR1 and 2 are current most used. DDR3 operates at the highest frequency and has 3 data transfer channels, thus increases bandwidth. Newly developed SSD hard disks currently are capable to meeting and exceeding the transfer rate of DDR and DDR2. A 32-bit operating system is only capable of utilizing 4 GB of memory. However, a 64-bit operating system is capable of supporting much more memory. ROM, which is read-only memory, refers to a read-only memory that cannot be written or raised by the computer user without special equipment. While using ROM, contents are not lost when power to the computer is no longer available. Since it does not need power, what we're gonna do is only memory chip is going to be written or erased by the computer users without special equipment. Let's talk about while using ROM, contents are not lost. In that way, we're gonna talk about the starting part. Since it does not need power, we cannot rewritten to the only things put on the ROM are starting introduction to. And let's say CMOS, it's a stands complementary metal oxide semiconductor, which is technology used in the chip and analog circuits. Don't lose contents when turned off, even if the content was not saved. Also, it keeps the time and rate current even when the computer is turned off. As you see in the computer case, lots of other expansion part is going on in the computer hardware where you can see it on the main board. That's in the expansion slots, expansion cards. It's going to the main board, especially system boards talks. We can switch on the memories in the part. Also, storage goes to the in the case that we're gonna done. Hard disk helps you to save in this memories very hard in the floppy drive and zip drive. It's depend of the what kind of capabilities you're gonna use it. And this motherboard is a system board. You have to understand that in the computer case. Also, you see backward of this memories and USB ports, mouse ports, connector, parallel modem ports, and phone port as well. And let's say about the microprocessor contains of variety of devices in that parts. Okay, and you see there's a processor of CPUs contains of circuits, components, and connected to the motherboards. It's quite very important. CPU is a speed microprocessor. It's on your computer, and processor speed is measuring megahertz or gigahertz. A computer word is group of bit of bytes that may be manipulated and stored as units, and also other factors that are affect speed of computers include RAM, cache memory, bus, and other things. Let's talk about the output devices. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in order to make use of computers, some forms of output devices must be used to allow the user to understand what is going on inside the machine. And simply, we're going to talk about the sounds, which is speakers, MIDI, and microphone. But don't forget about it, this microphone is not input, this is output microphone. Let's say printers, laser and inkjet. The plotter, which means large size of printer, which means plotter, which is pan, electrostatic, and large format of printers. We can talk about that. and also monitor. There are lots of different monitors from uh, last 10 years. Dot pinch resolution, color depth, refresh rate, CRT, flat panel, massive matrix, active matrix, LCD screen is very important. Of course, we're gonna talk about the different sounds as well, and also we're gonna talk about this computer system. Let me talk about the sounds. Computer can produce sound in the form of beep from the piece of speakers of its motherboard, so it can be sound card to produce true tone sound and sound like the real things. What we talk about the speakers, let's see in that part. Well, this is a primary method of sound output. The most computers today, sound is translated from bits to electrical signals in a sound card, which then channels the signals to the speakers. And we talk about the media. Why? Because this is MIDI is a musical instrument digital interface. Is an industry standard protocol that enables electronic musical instruments, computers, and other electronic equipments to communicate and synchronize with each other. Unlike analog devices, MIDI does not transmit an audio signal. It sends even messages about pitch and intensity, control signals for parameters such as volume, vibrate, and panning, cues, and clock signals to set the tempo. MIDI files are typically created using computer-based sequencing software, sometimes a hardware-based MIDI instruments and workstation that organizes MIDI messages into one or more parallel tracks for independent recording and editing. Let me talk about the microphone first. Sound is a devices used to change sound into electronic signals. In one way, you use microphone to input devices, but also it's a output devices as well, because it changes something, your voices analog devices to the electrical signals, which are used in telephones, tape recorders, hearing aids, and many other devices. Well, let me give you some more information about printers, which is a device that prints text or images, making a physical copy, usually some kind of ink or paper. Printers are classified into two types, impact and non-impact printers. Impact printers rely upon mechanical impacts that transfer ink to paper. Early printers were more like electric typewriters, striking an ink ribbon against the paper with a lever with a raised image or a batter on the end, or a rotating ball with the same. Non-impact printers depends on other ways of creating the image. Plotters covered separately can also be used as printers. And laser printer, I'm sure you've been using at home, which directs a laser beam onto a rotating drum covered by a photoconductor, which is a material that conducts electricity when illuminating. Carrying an electrostatic charge, the laser erases the charge in areas it strikes. When a powdered ink, which we call toner, charge the same polarity as the original surface charge of the drum, it spread across the surface and it is repelled from the areas that still carry the original charge, but it is attracted to the discharge areas where the image has written by the laser. The drum then rolls the image from onto paper, which is then heated to make the toner stick to itself on the paper. Well, I'm sure you will be using that. Let's talk about the inkjet, because 90% of the home printer user are inkjet printer because it's cheaper than. The inkjet printer is a type of computer printer that creates a digital image by propelling variable sized droplets of inkjet materials, which is ink, onto a page. Inkjet printers are the most common type of printers and range from the small inexpensive consumer models to very large and expensive professional machines. let me give you some different information about the plotters, especially what we use in this our department. A plotter is vector graphics printing device that connects to the computer. Vector graphics could be considered as point, lines, curves, and polygons, which are all based upon mathematical equations to represent images in the computer graphics. Raster graphics, by comparison, are known to the computer as just bunch of pixels. Raster graphics lose their sharpness. It made too big, but vector images can be expanded. Let me give you an example. In this our management information department, we have a section of geographical information systems, and many of our colleagues we have been using many projects and our big plotters, and this large printing system we can print big format of maps and we can put on a wall. So not only other raster images, also vector images we can analyze and put into the graphical representation of the map. So plotter is quite useful for our use in geographical information system projects. Let's talk about the pen. Plotters print their output by moving a pen across the surface of view of the paper. And you have to see about the end of the plotter is a pen plotter. This means that plotters are restricted to line art rather than raster graphics or with other printers. They can draw complex line art including text, but do so very slowly because of the mechanical movement of the pens. Early plotters worked by placing the paper over a roller which moved the paper back and forth for X motion, while the pen moved back and forth on a single arm of Y motion. What is electrostatic plotter? An electrostatic plotter produces a raster image by charging the paper with a high voltage. This voltage attracts toner, which is then melted into the paper with heat. This type of plotter is fast, but the quality is generally considered to be poor when compared to pen plotters. What about the large formats? And you see in this large formats we can talk about that. The monitor display is the next step. Let's see about this very large format printers. Is as I said 40-inch, 42-inch plotters. It's a quite a large format. And computer systems you can see many other things as very easily. And you have to talk about what is the computer and how we're gonna use in that say. And I'm not going to talk about the monitor in MS because you all know what the monitor is got. And let me say about this, what's the computer and what does it do? The minimum requirement for a computer system generally includes keyboard, a case containing a CPU and memory. Although the case itself isn't restricted necessary at all, but the important thing is inside of the computer case and the monitor. The data is usually entered via the keyboard and the information is usually presented through the screen. However, information can also be presented through speakers, braille display, or any other output devices. Data comes in through an input device, but it's sent to the CPU by memory. The CPU processes the data based on the data, of course, at the program which is memory. The CPU finished processing the data, that is information. The information can be stored in the memory presented through an information. Also, computer has input, processing, output. That's the simple things we have to know about that. And whatever we input and process and later the input, we have to save that. Where are we going to save? Some storage units. We got to do that. Let's see the system, storage, input, processing, output. And that's all. What's the traditional multimedia hardware? It's a computer consists of itself and it's a peripheral equipment. Multimedia, which system contains special hardware for use with sound and video. And what is CPU? It's heart of any computers. We have been told that. And memory temporarily stores program and while they are being processed. But see what I've been talking about that. Microphone, hard disk, deep drive, moldings, monitor, printer, whatever you see. And these are the components on our computer system at all.